Hey Brandon. So there's in the last chapters of Ezekiel, there's a temple being described. Tell me about it.
All right, so Ezekiel 40 through 48, when you get some time, go read through that. Isaiah gives us a detailed vision of a temple that he can see in the future. And we know, based on looking back into history, this temple was never built. There's a very large amount of people who can understand that this is, or at least believe, that this is the temple that we'll see during the millennial kingdom, right? We actually can see some corroborating evidence that when the millennial kingdom is established, there will be people that don't know of God's ways, that have survived through the tribulation, that have survived the sheep and the goat judgment of Christ in Matthew 25. And these people will have to go and learn about who the Lord is. And we know that it's at the beginning and the establishment of this kingdom because Isaiah 2 and Micah 4 tell us that it is at the end of the last days, which is right when Christ returns. These people are excited and they're telling to each other, hey, let's go up to the mountain of the Lord. Let's go up to the temple and learn the ways of him. We look in Isaiah 2 through 4. It says, now it will come to pass that in the last days, the mountain of the house of the Lord will be firmly established as the highest of mountains. And it will be exalted above the hills, and all nations will stream to it. And many people shall come and say, come, let's go up to the mountain of the Lord, to the house of the God of Jacob, that he may teach us his ways, and that we may walk in his paths. For the law will go out from Zion, and the word of the Lord from Jerusalem, and he will judge between the nations, and will mediate disputes for many people. And they will beat their swords into plowshares, and their spears into pruning hooks. Nations will not lift up any sword against nation, and never again will they learn war. Isaiah is giving us the vision of Christ ruling this kingdom, and those who have made it through will want to go up to his temple to learn about his statutes, his laws. Ezekiel specifically talks about the concept that there will be sacrifices in the millennial temple. And I think a lot of people today, especially from the Hebrew background, the Hebrew roots, erroneously try to say that that means we need to establish the Mosaic covenant and sacrifices today. Even though we don't have a temple, we need to follow after the parts of the Mosaic law that we can. But they're missing a very clear illustration in Scripture in that God is going to bring Hebrews in as a remnant and establish them in that kingdom in Israel, and he's going to teach them his ways. It's going to be round number 2 for the preschoolers that come into the millennial and need to learn about what Christ did, and it's going to be history lessons and object lessons for them so that they can understand who Jehovah is and why his son is ruling and reigning from Jerusalem during that 1,000-year Sabbath. We also see in Isaiah, he's talking about, if you move forward through Isaiah, you can see it talks about prosperity. It talks about this beating of weapons into plowshares. It's going to be a Sabbath of 1,000 years. And it's going to be ruled and reigned by Christ as the moral and judicial authority from his throne in Jerusalem. We look at Micah 4, 1 through 3. It says, but it just says the same thing. But it shall come about in the last days that the mountain of the Lord, the mountain of the house of the Lord shall be established as the highest and chief of the mountains. Just really quickly, mountain is talking about the entire judicial rule or governmental rule from Jerusalem. It's going to be the highest authority. And the chief of the mountains, it shall be above the hills, and people shall flow like a river to it. And many nations shall come and say, come, let us go up to the mountain of the Lord, to the house of the God of Jacob, that he may teach us about his ways, and that we may walk in his paths. For the law shall go forward from Zion, and the word of the Lord, the revelation about him and his truth, from Jerusalem. He will judge between many peoples, and render decisions for strong and distant nations. Then they shall hammer their swords into plowshares, and their spears into pruning hooks, so that the implements of war may become the tools of agriculture. Nation shall not lift up sword against nation, nor shall they ever again train for war. God promised to the Israelite nation and to Abraham that there would be parts of his covenant that he will fulfill during this time. And a big part of that is God selecting his remnant of the Hebrew people to establish in Israel, and they will be able to inherit the land that God had promised to them. And a lot of people fail to realize that just because they're Hebrew and in the kingdom does not mean that they have salvation. Those who have salvation through Christ will be transformed at his return, and we will be established with authority. We will rule and reign in this kingdom as he has promised, and there will be people that we will be ruling over who have not found that salvation. There will be people that will find salvation in the millennial kingdom. We do see evidence of that. But just because the Hebrews are there and they're of Hebrew heritage does not mean that they've gotten salvation. But God is not someone who is not faithful to his promises, and he will establish those and fulfill them during that millennial reign. So if you have any sort of confusion on that concept, you need to look at the whole context of Scripture and the illustrations all throughout the minor prophets and prophets of the Old Testament, because they give us a very clear illustration of what we can anticipate in the next kingdom. Because if we're part of that and we're ambassadors for Christ, we should be able to articulate what that kingdom